The duty free and I have a complicated relationship. I used to challenge them all the time. I used to line up the back seat of my Nissan Altima and I'd pull up and you'd watch the border agent's face go, ah.
As soon as you said the Nissan Altima, all I thought about was you hitting that lady on the thruway really lightly from behind and me driving by you and you were sitting on the front of your car smoking a cigarette.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the AFC's Roundup Podcast. I'm your host, Bill, season ticket holder Drew Gear. That's my producer, Chris Kruger. Riding shotgun with me tonight, Doug Roloski, everybody. Back in studio with us. Always a good time.
What's going on?
And we're here taking a look around the AFC East. You know, the ups and downs of free agency as it goes on. You know, there's obviously the tampering period, all the buzz and everything that comes along with that. And if you look at the Bills, you know, you've got the fireworks after the Bosa signing, which love it or hate it, you know, love it or hate it, they need to have a plan. Mm-hmm. You know, everyone's talked that to death. You know, right up to the chair being kicked out from underneath us. That was a pair of random PED suspensions.
Yeah.
And just all of this stuff, you know, I mean, it happened literally as soon as those guys put pen to paper here in Buffalo. Free agency has been interesting, if nothing else. But beyond just the Buffalo Bills, I think it's always good because Brandon Beane, in his end of season presser, he was asked, hey, the moves that you're going to make this offseason and the moves you're going to make, the way you're going to set your draft board, like how much more work do you think you need? Like how much of it's going to be geared towards beating Kansas City? And Brandon Beane had the perfect response. He says, look, I can't worry. Like you hope you get to run into Kansas City. I have to worry about taking care of my division because if I take care of my division, that's how I get back to that game.
Yeah.
And so he kind of underscored, I'm never just going out and planning for one thing and making that the focal point of my offseason drive. And I think his actions spoke to that a little bit. And so it's been interesting to watch the way we've propped ourselves up for what Beane's vision of a successful 2025 Buffalo Bills looks like in theory. Now, for all the conversation that's gone on around, hey, what did they do? Who did they sign? How did we do things? I think the question that I have for everybody as we go through this is, are you happy with what your team did? And do you think that you set yourself up for the next part of the off-season cycle, the next phase of off-season team building? And if not, where do you think the weaknesses are? How do you think that the strategy that you employed and the talent you ended up obtaining, how did that shape your draft? How did it shape the way that you're probably going to have to lean? Do you still have needs, et cetera, et cetera? I think it's interesting to take a look around the division and get a feel for where we line up against our corollaries here in that way. And then also take a little bit of maybe a more critical eye to the Buffalo Bills.
What, are you scared of Justin Fields now that he's a Jet? Come on.
Well, it's funny you say that because that's where we start tonight's show. And so with that, we bring in tonight's first guest, Mr. Antwan Staley from the New York Daily News, Jets beat reporter extraordinaire. I had the pleasure of meeting him in person finally at a tailgate this past season. It was a rainy day, but we did make the best out of it, I think. Right, Ant?
Yeah, I mean, as good as it could be where it's like, 15, 20 mile per hour winds and, rain going all over the place. But yeah.
That sounds about right.
It is funny, though. Like we do this every week when we go, the weather won't be that bad. And then you show up and it's Buffalo. So obviously the weather's terrible. And you go, well, I'll put a little, you go, oh, this weather's terrible. And then you have a little whiskey and you go, it's not so bad. Then you have a little more whiskey and you go, I could live with this. And then you go,
it was warm. It was warm. I'll say that for, it was like 50 degrees, but it was still raining. It went all over the place. So that was the bad part.
Antwan, you've been covering the Jets beat for a couple of years. First of all, why don't you tell everybody right off the top where they can follow you on social media and where they can find all your written work?
And Antwan Staley, just my name on all social media platforms. Also find my work at nydailynews.com.
So I've really been interested to pick your brain about this. Had a chance to talk to Scott Mason about it. Now I want to hear it from your perspective. You've been working the Jets beat for a few years now. What was your first year? Again, I think it was
22.
22. So you've been around and you've gotten to see this team make some pretty dramatic moves in terms of trying to figure out the solution to making a winning roster. You know, the way that they struggled to build around a really highly drafted rookie quarterback. And then they kind of blew that idea up and said, hey, that's not the problem. Let's go chase down Aaron Rodgers and all the drama that came along with the Aaron Rodgers acquisition. And then kind of how they reshaped, they trade for Devonta Adams, they bring in Alan Lazard. They basically recreated they made the New Jersey Packers. And just all of the hoops that they jumped through and the injuries and the detritus and firings and all the stuff that you've gotten to take in a 3-year window. I feel like New York City is the only market where something like this can be possible, and fans still find optimism every offseason because it's a hyperbolic market.
You hadn't looked at Jets fans recently, have you?
No.
I'm really optimistic at all right now.
And that was going to be my question. So where's the pulse of the fan base now? Is it is everybody a little bit down finally?
Finally? I mean, yeah, people have been down for a while. I think people have been down since the season last year. I mean, and I said it when it happened, anytime you make an in-season coaching change, and I've been part of this in Miami and other places too in Carolina, the season's pretty much over. It's very rare, unless you go on a run like the Raiders did in 21, where you fire John Gruden and make a change there. You're not going to make the playoffs. And I think I knew that, but a lot of Jet fans were in a bit of a denial. So now, I think the shoe is,
it's finally fallen,
whatever like that. And now, they're trying to figure out what this team might be for 25. And, you got a new regime in there with Aaron Glenn, Darren Muji. And I think it's going to be, some people call it a rebuild. I think it's more of a retooling, but whatever the case may be, I don't really expect them to be very good this year. I think you kind of look at their signings as kind of very low risk, possible high reward guys that they'll find out if they want to keep past the first year or not. But, I think a lot of Jet fans are very angry because it's been 15 years of, kind of the same thing. And I understand that. But I also think that they need to give this new regime some time in order to, try to let the plan come in place too. And, I think 3 years, is a good enough amount of time in order to do that. Whereas some Jet fans are already ready to fire Aaron Glenn right now. But,
what was your feeling on Aaron Glenn?
I thought that was a good move. I thought it was the right move there. Somebody that's familiar with, the Jets organization there. He played, when Woody first took over, Woody Johnson, the owner, when he came in 2000 there. They have a decent relationship. Obviously Aaron Glenn, a homegrown guy from a first round pick out of Texas A&M. And I think you look at the Lions situation and what Dan Campbell came into in 21, it started out rocky, but I think they continue to get better after each year. And I think if you're the Jets, you hope that Aaron Glenn can have some kind of similar, type of trajectory where, you can get better, after year one and, make that stride where eventually you're contending for, a Super Bowl, kind of like what the Lions are right now. But yeah, I thought it was a really good move. I thought it was the right move for them, especially considering, the last few years, it didn't work whatsoever.
I wasn't happy because I'm obviously a Bills fan, but I'm also a Lions fan because my family's from Michigan and I get to go to a game a year. And I wasn't happy about it because I think he's an excellent coach. It's going to take him a minute.
Yeah.
And he's going to have to get his pieces together. But yeah, for people who got mad, I think it's a solid hire.
Well, this is where not having an opinion on either the coach or the GM, what I will say is it's interesting to see the Jets finally, for what feels like forever, have a boring start to the offseason. Mm-hmm. You hired a coach who everybody seemed to like, but to your point, everybody's already impatient. But you got a guy who everyone who you talk to, even strangers, Bills fans, will tell you, hey, Aaron Glenn's a really good, it's a solid hire. It's not, you didn't shoot for the moon. I need the superstar. I need just a solid guy who can come in and build a culture. Then you go out and you get a GM and everyone goes, I've never heard of this guy. That doesn't mean it's a terrible move. Right. It just means you don't know him yet.
Exactly.
I swear to God, I could sit down and do a podcast with a panel of Jets writers and podcasters about the anatomy of a drought. And when you're in a playoff drought that goes this long, you get to learn the evolution of it and you see what worked and didn't work. Obviously for us, it was almost 2 decades of not working.
And we're in one right now with the Sabres.
And when it did work, what did they do that was so dramatically different? And the first thing that I notice is the concept that boring, and in some cases, what almost seems like you're selling off talent. In some cases, you're like, why'd they give up on that player? Because you have to reset the cap so that they can rebuild this thing kind of in the image that this brain trust believes is correct. So when I see that and I watch what they did in terms of the offseason, so signings in totality, I think it is, to your point, a lot of really low risk moves that don't cause any long-term damage to the salary cap. And it will give them time to lay a better foundation that they can get kind of pick things up and run with them. Maybe not now, maybe not next year, but in the next 3 years, you can start seeing the shape of this as long as ownership has patience. And that's always the.
Yeah, that could always go either way. But I think also to your point as well, like they didn't have a lot of money. Like they just didn't have a lot of salary cap money. So they needed to shed some of that money too. And even now they still have a lot of money. I mean, they have about $31 million. And then not to mention like some of their contract, some of the deals that they've agreed upon have not become official. So the way that I see it is they're pretty much done in terms of big money moves. And, they got to sign their draft class too. So you also have to keep that in mind. They'll gain more money after, CJ Mosley and Aaron Rodgers come off the books after June 1st. So maybe, depending on who's out there, that might be an option to maybe sign somebody. But yeah, I mean, it's going to take some time. Like, again, people, you talked about the Sabres. And then when the Jets have the longest playoff
drive. They do. It's funny. Before you came on, we were talking off camera about it, and it's frustrating. So we understand, we get it. You know what I mean? It's very, very frustrating to keep having to. Here we go again. Here we go again. Here we go again. It's frustrating. It's a cycle that doesn't end.
And what's hard is that a lot of times when you see that kind of just constant recurrence of situation, it comes from the same place. Guys come in, they say, okay, well, if I can just retool, use the word retool. The problem is if you just retool, you're probably going to run into some of the same missteps that the previous regime did. Whereas if you do what Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott did in 2018, like 2017, they started paring the roster down, but they won. Somehow, in spite of all the cuts and trades, they won.
I was there when they broke the drought against the Dolphins. So.
Yeah, and so you got to see that firsthand, and then it was like, they kept going the year after when everyone's like, well, wait a minute. How come you're not trying to make the team better? They're like, no. We still have medicine to take.
Right.
Let's pare this thing down to the bones so that we can rebuild around this rookie quarterback we drafted. That's where I think the acquisition of your quarterback is really interesting because it really is the ultimate low risk, high reward maneuver for a team that's in the Jets positions. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a 1-year deal. Yeah. I mean, that's basically what it is. I mean, I know it's a 2-year deal, technically, $30 million guaranteed. I don't think that's a long-term commitment there. You want to see if Justin Fields could potentially be that guy. I mean, he's run into a lot of bad luck in places like Chicago and, Pittsburgh. I actually thought he played really well for the most part at Pittsburgh there. His, passing isn't very polished there, but you hope that, he continues to get better. And I feel like he has. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the most stable situation with the Bears, but, you look at, Pittsburgh, and I think that was a much better situation for him. And now you pair him up with his former college teammate, Garrett Wilson. Maybe, you have Breece Hall there. I feel like they can lean a little bit more on the running game there. I don't think the Jets offensive line is nearly as bad as, has been in years past. And, just see if it can work. And if it doesn't, then, you're in the market for a quarterback and a draft class that I think is going to be substantially better than what it is this year. And if it does work, then, he's still young enough where you can still, commit to him long term and maybe get him another year.
And I think you brought up the two guys who I think are going to be key pieces moving forward. I do think Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall both are going to eventually get deals. I don't
know about Breece, but I definitely think Garrett will. Like the thing with Breece hasn't had a 1,000-yard season yet. Believe it or not.
He's a fantasy football darling, and yet when you look at his production, I'm always like, I don't see it. I don't see
used as part of it. I think a part of it, you had Nathaniel Hackett. He had no idea how to. He had no idea Breece Hall could catch the ball. Basically, like 3/4 until like December of 23. He was like, I had no idea he was such a great pass catcher out of the backfield. He said that to us like point blank at a press conference, and I'm like. I mean, you can go back to Iowa State and that. I don't understand.
How does the media and how do fans think about how Sauce Gardner's year went?
He told us like he felt like it was a down year, and I agree with him. I mean, he had a lot of missed tackles. I don't know the number of penalties, but it was a lot compared to some of his other years there. And I think having a guy like Aaron Glenn, who's been a high-profile corner in the league too, will definitely help him. I mean, at some point it was going to happen. I mean, you can't just, you're going to have a down year at some point. I mean, it happens. It's the lower averages. I mean, Sauce had such an incredible first 2 years in the league. And, last year he was a little bit more grabby. I felt like it was more of an emphasis to call penalties on him. I feel like teams were calling the league of like, he's very handsy.
You
like,
can't have a whole summer of people just airing this narrative of he grabs everybody on social media. And then you have referees who go, guys, we're trying to be as impartial as possible, but it's in there. It's been harped on for over a year. So then when you see it in real time, you're a little more apt to throw a flag. Right. Like I think I saw a statistic the one time where they were talking about how on a given play, the passing team is like 48% more likely to get a pass interference call thrown in their favor if the ball is thrown to the sideline where the home team is, probably because that coach is working that ref. He's working
right there in his ear
all game. And so you're more likely to get that call just because the ref doesn't want to hear that coach. He's like, I don't want to get screamed at. We're all humans, right?
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, I think he had a down year. He'll tell you that too. But I think he'll, having Aaron Glenn there, and I think being grabby, I mean, that's teachable. Like you can definitely teach that. You can teach people not to do that, and I think that's fine. And I think he'll be fine. I think he's still going to be a tremendous corner there. I think he's going to get the stitch in there from the Jets. It's just a matter of when, not if, because it's not a high priority right now. Obviously, you have a new regime in there, and they have other priorities. But I think it'll get done at some point.
Well, I also
think it's easier than Garrett's. Garrett's a little bit tougher, but his is a lot easier.
But I even think on a 3-year deal, Garrett's not that hard to see because you look at what they did in free agency this year. There were no long-term agreements handed out,
right? In
reality, and then you have the quarterback deal that, as you said, you can easily get out of, and then what else do you have? It's almost like it actually like with the cap space that you do have, it would make sense to wait until training camp, wait till your money comes after June 1, go make these deals because it doesn't matter. You're not going to be big players in free agency this year. You're not going to probably be chasing big name free agents next year. So why not? You got the money to burn. You might as well keep guys around that you think are useful. I mean, that's what fueled this year's trade market was the fact that teams did that. They went in and said, hey, even if we don't love you, we're going to lock you up for a while because at least then we control your contract and we can do whatever we want with you after the fact, whether it's trade you away for draft considerations or whatever you have. I feel like the Jets are set up really well to do that.
I think the problem with Garrett is like, what does he want to be paid? Like, and what do you view him? That's the problem. It's not necessarily wanting to keep him. Does he consider himself like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins? Because that's a lot of money. And I think Garrett can be a top. It's tough. Like, I think he's already like a top 20 receiver. But are you giving a top 20 receiver, that much money?
Are you paying him DK money?
Well, he's got to have the Khalil Shakir sense of self-awareness. It's just, hey, I know what my role is. I know what I've done. Let me sign a 2-3 year deal so I can up my stock and dip back into this before I'm too old to cash in.
Right.
Least favorite move or least move you understood the least out of this entire free agency cycle?
With the Jets or just in general?
Jets, just with the Jets.
I don't hate any of their moves, to be quite honest with you.
That's good.
I think they signed a punter, and I'm like, okay. Yeah. Thomas Morstead is up there in age. He's almost 40 years old, so I understand that. But, you look at Andre Cisco, Syracuse guy, and, I think, getting the safety help, I think that was big too. Again, like if it doesn't work out, then guess what?
Right.
That's it. There's nothing to be mad at because you guys didn't take any gambles.
Right.
Exactly. And then even then, that doesn't preclude them from taking a safety or any other position in the draft. Even if they want to take a quarterback in the draft, which I think they're going to at some point, I think they will.
And so is that safe to say that in terms of how they've positioned themselves for the draft, in terms of what their goals are, which is just to achieve a level of stability as a franchise across and raise the overall talent level at every position, not just one or two, because they don't just have one or two holes. It seems like the Jets have the least work out of anybody in the division to do because there is upgrades at every position that's possible. So just they could go into this draft and take best player available almost across the board, and it would be hard to get mad at if you're a Jets fan, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think the problem is, like you said, they have so many holes. Like last year, you coming off last year where you had a lot of people thought this team, they had a lot of big names. I don't want to say they're loaded because I think that's very misguided, because if they were loaded, then they wouldn't have won 5 games. But I think they had a lot of big names. They just didn't play well as a team. And now you're resetting that with lower, trendy names. And they still might be, solid contributors, but it goes back to my original point as well. You're just trying to see if these guys can play and fill these holes long term. If they can, then great, you'll keep them long term. If they can't, then ship them out and get some other people in there. But yeah, I definitely think they still have a lot of holes to fill. I mean, you look at D tackle. I mean, still like secondary, I think is still a big spot. They need a right tackle, long term there. But the Morgan Moses left. They need help at wide receiver. A lot of people have tried to, peg them and, take it a wide receiver. If they are, I think Matthew Golden, I think he's the odds-on choice to be that if you want to do that. So, yeah, they have a lot of holes to fill and, probably not enough spots to fill all those holes either.
No, it probably not, but that's why it's called a rebuilding process, right? You start trying to stack good decisions on top of good decisions, and eventually good things will happen to you. That's the theory, right?
Yeah, you see. Yeah, and I didn't mention tight end either. They need tight end help too as well. So, yeah, they have a lot of holes to fill.
Antwan, I appreciate you joining us. Again, remind everybody where they can follow you on social media.
Just my name, Antwan Staley, and also find my work at nydailynews.com.
So we open a fresh beverage as we switch gears. Talking about the New York Jets, it's always fun, right? It's always fun talking about the Jets because literally they have nowhere to go but up.
Right.
And then you wheel around and you try to talk about the Miami Dolphins, who, last year when we kept talking about all the teams that, we're going to, not just could, but we're going to absolutely leapfrog the Buffalo Bills for the AFC East title, the most believable one was the Miami Dolphins. And yet it didn't quite pan out that way. And now here they are entering an offseason where I don't really know what to make of it in terms of the changes they need, because retool, rebuild, you don't really know where to be. And that's where talking to Alf Arteaga always kind of helps give me some perspective on what's going on down there. And we're joined by him this evening from 3 yards per carry. Alf, obviously it's a gorgeous day down there. I can see the sunshine coming in from your blinds. You've got a little ESPN on. How's life as a Dolphins fan 2 weeks into free agency?
It's a little bit different than we're used to, because we're used to like winning the offseason and spending a lot of money. But it's obvious that Stephen Ross has turned off the spigot. He's turned off the credit card, and they're spending responsibly. And after having a decent free agent period last year with some smart signings, namely Aaron Brewer and Jordan Brooks and Calais Campbell for cheap. I know I'm missing somebody in there. Jordan Porter is not among them, by the way.
No.
Okay. So after having, pretty decent free agent period, it seems that they're doing that again. They just have a little bit of work to do, but that's why they have 10 draft picks.
Sure.
In the NFL draft. So, and right now it seems like they've completed the linebacking core in the last few minutes by signing Willie Gay. So that's a pretty decent linebacking core. I think we got to be pretty happy about that if you're a Dolphin fan, because it's been a while since you had 4 linebackers you could point to and say, we know their roles and we know how good they can or cannot be. So I think that with, Jordan Brooks, Tyrell Dodson, KJ Britt, and Willie Gay, I think you're pretty happy with the 4 that you have.
What I love is that every offseason you manage to nail at least 1, if not 2 or 3 of the signings that you're like, well, the Dolphins should quote unquote do this. And they at least bring in 1 or 2 of them. And so it does make me question why you don't drive around the parking lot like George Costanza and Seinfeld when he's trying to get fired with a megaphone, just screaming ideas at the building, hoping that your GM's listening.
Well, we've hit 4 so far,
That's a pretty nice victory lap, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, we've hit 4 so far. We create I don't know, for those that don't know, we have a Discord called OnlyFins, and we created like a cheat sheet, which is essentially our plan for free agency, and we give you like our rankings for every single unit, and then we give like what they're going to cost and the guys that we want, and we put our name right next to the guys that we want. Dolphins have signed 4 guys that we had our name right next to it, and one of them was a consensus guy, which was James Daniels. We had him as our number 1 target of the offseason, and they got him. So I guess you got to be happy about that.
Where was re-signing Javon Holland on that list?
Nowhere on that list.
Wow.
They didn't want him.
Did not appear. And that's what I love. Like, that's why I love these conversations, because Doug, as kind of an outsider, would go, oh man, they must be upset Javon Holland's gone. Couldn't be further from the truth, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, we wanted to replace him. This was a year. Look, he was bad this past season, but what people don't remember is how bad he was the previous year. Like, he left all his good football really in 2021. I would have told anybody that would have asked me, that was his rookie season. I would have told anybody who would ask me, this is a defensive player of the year candidate in the future. Okay. He was okay in 2022. And you could kind of see it like, hey, man, we're going to pay this guy a lot of money. In 2023, it was just different. Yeah. First of all, he butted heads with the defensive coordinator at the time, Vic Fangio. I don't know if you guys remember, but when Vic Fangio left that offseason,
he was the one who told me he was out there kicking rocks.
Yeah, Javon Holland was the one that videotaped himself kicking rocks. Okay, so and mind you, he did not have a good season. Okay, and then of course he followed up.
One of them goes on to win a Super Bowl in impressive fashion, and one of them is going to the Giants. He's going to the Giants.
Yeah, he basically went to the highest bidder. He had these visions in his head. Oh, I'm going to. I don't know if you guys saw the interview he made. He made an interview which essentially described the Eagles situation.
Mm-hmm.
He said he wanted a veteran defensive coordinator, a team that had a chance to win a Super Bowl, established personnel on the defensive side of the ball. He wanted coaches that are not in the hot seat. Like, he basically was describing the Eagles. Oddly enough, he ran the Eagles defensive coordinator out of town.
Yeah.
So along with others, by the way. But yeah, the problem with Javon Holland has been he had a spectacular rookie season. In my opinion, he should have been in the running for Rookie of the Year that year. I'm pretty certain there was some guy that went crazy in 2021 that took it from him. But I thought he deserved a shot at Defensive Rookie of the Year. In 2022, he was good. 23, he was awful. Well, not awful, but not good. And in 2024, this past season, he was just god-awful.
You could almost tell like he had already moved on mentally. Yeah. Mentally, he was already thinking about his contract. And that's where
he's audacity. In 2023, people forget. In 2023, he had the interception against the Jets, the Hail Mary. You guys remember that?
Yeah.
He runs back a Hail Mary, 99 yards for a touchdown. In that game, he left the game in the third quarter with an MCL issue. Okay. That week in practice, he was telling everybody, "Oh, I'm fine. I'll be back. I'll be back next week. I'm playing. I'm okay." Then all of a sudden, he started complaining about his other MCL. And 2 weeks after that, he's doing interviews and saying, no, I got 2 MCL injuries, but I should be back for the last week of the season. And if not, I'm absolutely playing against Baltimore. The guy never suited up again.
Yeah. I mean, he's that guy who, look, when I saw that interview you're talking about, my first question was, sir, I don't know where you got the audacity, but you need to put it back. You need to put it back.
Yeah, and the rumors were that he was talking, because the Dolphins did approach him before this past season, about doing something. And supposedly he had told them, Antwan Winfield money or we're not talking. That's $20 million a year.
No, you ain't paying
So
that.
evidently that didn't fly. And then before this free agent period, I guess they touched on him and said, look, if you don't find your market, I guess we can take you back for this. And supposedly what they offered him was
Jordan Poyer,
considered an insult.
The Bills cut Jordan Poyer and then said, hey, if you can't find a gig at a price that you can agree with, come back here, but our number is our number. We won't change it. We won't pull the rug out from under you. This is our number.
Supposedly the number they had for Javon Holland was somewhere around $12 million a year.
Okay, so the number we had for Jordan Poyer the year that after you signed him away was 1.6. And so that's why when I saw you guys give him a contract, I was like, oh no. So this year you seem to have avoided that Jordan Poyer moment. It doesn't seem like you've made that like one glaring mistake, but there was something that I did see, and it comes from your podcast co-host. It's a tweet, and I want you to walk us through it. Chris, if you guys are watching on YouTube, it's going to be up there. You can read it for yourselves. For those of you on audio, James Daniel, Larry Borum, Artie Burns, and Alexander Madison all have direct ties with Dolphins front office newcomer Champ Kelly. Mm-hmm. And Ryan Stonehouse, Nick Westbrook-Kenny both have direct ties with newcomer to Miami's coaching staff, Craig Aukerman. And Fatu Melifonwu was coached in Detroit by Dolphins pass coordinator Brian Duker. And Ashton Davis and Zach Wilson are players that the Dolphins coaching staff have seen him prepared to play against twice a year, coached by Mike McDaniel's buddy Jeff Ulbrich and Mike LaFleur, respectively. Mm-hmm. Who is in charge of this place? And it's just you with Roman Reigns underneath it, with like pointing up at the. So obviously you co-sign this as an outsider. Give me the skinny on what it is you're trying to say here, because I feel like there's a negative connotation to this.
I think that they hired Chris Greer's replacement already, and he's the shadow GM as of right now.
So he's a figurehead? He's basically...
Yeah, I think Chris Greer is dead man walking. They're probably going to promote him, one of those, promotions with no title and no power. And I think, look, I don't have any information on this, but if I had to guess, I think Champ Kelly is the GM going forward, probably next season,
which would be
maybe right after the draft.
Well,
but you can see the writing on the wall. Where did Champ Kelly get his start?
Yeah,
from Mike Shanahan, who was on staff with him.
Yeah,
yeah.
Okay, so it seems like Mike McDaniel has won. You wouldn't call it a power struggle, more of a power tiff, right? And it looks like Mike McDaniel's in favored nation status, and Chris Greer is probably on the way out.
It is interesting when you see that, Doug, right? Like the front office, when you go, hey, wait a minute. All of the guys that you brought in and all of the ideas that got put into effect in free agency, none of these are organic to this one guy. It all has a tie to somebody else.
And if you notice, it's everybody under Mike McDaniel.
Yes.
I just, like, from an outsider's perspective, like, you guys are not the dumpster fire of the Jets. You're not that. But a couple of years ago, even last year, I at least saw like a plan for you guys. I just don't know what your plan is moving forward, because any bumps in the road, you already know, you saw at the end of last year, Tyreek Hill is probably going to get a little negative with the media after a couple losses, and then maybe Ramsey to follow. And those are two contracts that are going to be extremely hard to move on from in the near future. And it's just like, I just don't know the direction of where you're going. That's the only thing. I just don't know. Like, how do you feel as a fan right now? Like, how comfortable are you that you think you can get back to being in a wild card game or trying to beat the Bills for the division?
Yeah, you could kind of tell what they're trying to do by how they structure all their contracts. One thing you can say about the Dolphins is that they have one guy in their power structure that's really, really good at his job, and that's Brandon Shore. He's the cap guy. And if you look at their cycles, they're going to get off. The only decision that they made, which was an active decision to actually push money forward, was Bradley Chubb. Like, they essentially decided Bradley Chubb is playing for us this year. So they decided that the edge rotation is going to be Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips, and Chop Robinson. Those are the three guys. So that's the only decision that they made going forward. They're not touching Jalen Ramsey's money going forward, and Tyreek Hill, his money basically devolves into nothing at the end of the season.
So you got to get through one more year with him.
Yeah. So what you're looking at is they're probably going to approach Ramsey for an extension at a much smaller number, and probably a move to safety at the end of the season. But Tyreek Hill will be outright cut at the end of the season.
So then, does this
if not traded this season? Like, if they could get something nice for him now,
right?
That'd be a good thing.
And so this is usually when you're talking about making these kind of maneuvers. This is the talk of a team that's doing like a retool, maybe not a full scale rebuild, but definitely a retooling. And that's a far cry from where we thought the Dolphins were going to be last year at this same time, when we were talking about winning the offseason, as you said, and talking about, hey, our mission is we're going to get over the hump this year. We're going to beat Buffalo for the division. Obviously, fans are more hyperbolic about this than people who study the team and do things. But there's all this hubbub about, we were joking on Twitter today about everyone's mad that the quarterback's drinking beer and eating oysters. He has a little bit of body fat on him, and it's like, do you have any idea how hard these guys work?
Right.
They're professionals, and when you watch that guy show up to training camp, and by the second week of camp, he looks trim, you're gonna be like, how'd he do that? Because he's a fucking athlete.
Right.
They're not you. They're not me and Alf Arteaga sucking down a case of beer on a boat and eating oysters. But then, as Alf pointed out, you drink a couple beers and you do that, and what you realize is you don't get that much fatter. It doesn't kill you, right?
Yeah. No, he's enjoying his off season, and that's fine. He'll get back to work, and he's the quarterback going forward. And they got money tied into him for the next 2 years at least. So he's the quarterback, and they're trying to do as much as possible to help him out. I think they've had a pretty nice offseason on the offensive side of the ball. The defensive side of the ball is where there's still a little bit of concern. You kind of like what they've done at safety and at linebacker, but they've essentially done nothing at defensive tackle. So maybe they're waiting on Calais Campbell and a couple of other shoes to drop. But
sure,
if they had to play a game on Sunday, you know who would line up for the Dolphins along the defensive line, right?
Mm-hmm.
Zach Sealer and nobody else.
And Sealer's a beast.
He's good.
But he is
right. But he can't play 3 spots.
No. He
So
can't.
they've got some work to do now.
Yeah,
we know James Daniels has to be your favorite move of the offseason because it's a home run on the interior and a position of need on the offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
As far as least favorite moves, or at least move you understood the least, I feel like I already know what it is. So I've got 2 questions. One, how the hell did Zach Wilson end up back in the AFC East on your team? And even far more confusing, and maybe even frustrating, because at this point it feels like Chris Greer is just fucking with you guys. Why is Liam Eichenberg back on your roster?
That one. Look, I can explain Zach Wilson because I had him on my cheat sheet, and I had him on my cheat sheet because I know that Darrell Bevel and Mike McDaniel like him as a guy to work with, and I have some information. I would expect them to go after a more veteran quarterback, and then you're going to see something like Tua, the veteran quarterback, Zach Wilson, and then some developmental guy that they get as a UDFA or a 7th round pick or something like that. That could be the quarterback room. But look, Zach Wilson did an interview and he kind of gave it up. The guy who picks quarterbacks on this team is Mike McDaniel and Darrell Bevel. And both of those guys like him. They wanted to work with him. And of course they consulted with Sean Payton. And, I guess they got him to sign off. One thing's for sure, Zach Wilson, I thought this was a really odd stat. Zach Wilson has twice as many wins against the Buffalo Bills that Tua has.
He does. He does.
But Tua has 13 times as many wins against the Jets and the Patriots that Zach Wilson does.
That's funny.
Zach Wilson has never beaten the Patriots or the Patriots or the Dolphins,
right?
While Tua has never lost to the Patriots or the Jets. So,
what was your face like? Can you take me back to the moment that you read that Liam Eichenberg was back?
Well, I had like a spoiler because Simon says they're talking to him, and I think that they're bringing him back. And I'm thinking to myself, look, and I know some fans are saying he's depth. He's the 7th offensive lineman. He's the 4th guard. I don't care. I don't care where the hell he is. Just keep him off of the team. He's not good. His
position needs to be left bench. Like, that's it. That's where you should be.
Yeah. Well, he shouldn't be on the roster.
Right? No, he's probably, like, I go back and I will question how many other teams is he a rosterable player on? And why did Miami feel like it was a priority to go out and get him? Was anyone really beating you to the punch before training camp? I can't imagine that's the case.
Right.
Yeah, I don't understand why, you could kind of see the vision with, look, with James Daniels, it's obvious, right? Like, really 100%. Talented guy, perfect scheme fit. He's a guy that would cost you $18-20 million a year if he didn't get injured this past year. But other than this past year, he was pretty durable. So that's a home run signing, right? Larry Borum, although his tape is terrible at tackle, you could kind of see, he's a 6'5", 335-pound guy who his best work is as a run blocker. You kind of see the vision as a guard.
He could do the Becton thing where you move him inside and say, look, he won't be as exposed. His technique.
Right. You could kind of see the vision. With Liam Eichenberg, First of all, he's not a good scheme fit. He's not a good player. His versatility. Yeah, he can play every position on the offensive line.
Poorly.
Technically, I can too. The problem is that I'll play them all poorly, right?
We could make an offensive line of me, you, Doug, and Liam Eichenberg, and we all do about the same job.
Yeah, because everybody keeps saying, "Oh, but he could play center, he could play both guard spots, and he could play tackle." Yeah, so can I. You know, like if you put me out there, I promise you, I can line up properly. Okay.
I love it. And I love that we're approaching a point in the offseason where now everyone has to shift their eyes to the draft. I can't wait to get back together to you and talk about draft goals and just your assessment of certain players. I look forward to doing this again, but for tonight, we got to get the hell out of here. Where can everybody follow you on social media, and where can they follow your work over at OnlyFans?
Well, if you want to follow me, it's always at Alf_Arteaga. If you want to follow our work at 3 yards per carry on Twitter or X, you go to the number 3 yards per carry. You want to listen to our podcast? It's anywhere you get your podcast. It's also 3 yards per carry. And of course, our Discord, discord.gg/OnlyFins. If you're Bills fans and you just want to give us money to troll us, we'll do that too.
And so with that, we usher in our final guest of the evening. And it's a guy who I've been dying to talk to for forever since he abandoned Twitter and no longer, like, I can't comment snarkily on his tweets anymore. Mr. Mark Schofield. Mark, how you doing, baby? How's life treating you?
I've been good, man. I'm good. It's great to be back with you guys. I took last year off. Basically, I was out of the draft game. I had some stuff going on the personal front.
Sure.
So I will say it was fantastic to not be involved with all of that crap.
Isn't it relieving when you get outside of it and then get to look back in and go, wait a minute, what? What was I doing?
You know, what was all the time spent, hours and hours pouring over film to debate like which quarterback was better, Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis? Like, what the hell am I doing with my life?
Kenny Two Gloves, Cleveland Brown,
that
baby.
debate. Like, what are we doing with our lives? What are we doing with our lives when that's the discussion? So, yeah, I was off last year. It was great, but we're back in the swing events now. And I'm guessing you had me on to talk about the New England Patriots, a team near and dear to my heart. So I guess we can dive into that if you really want to.
I
want to know, have you been to, I think it's called Azerbaijan? Have you been there yet?
I have not been to Azerbaijan yet. Now, maybe later this season, the powers that be at Vox will say, yeah, I can go overseas and get to Baku for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. We'll see. You know, I'm firming up my F1 travel schedule as we speak. I'll be down in Miami in a couple of weeks, so that'll be a fun time. I'll absolutely be in Austin and probably Vegas, but overseas travel, still waiting on that one.
I love that you went from being the guy who were like, this is the guy I go to for all my NFL draft takes. And then it's like, wait a minute, you know F1? You even know what it is? And then you can talk about it, and now you're in it. Like, you've broken fresh ground, and I love that. I love that about your willingness to jump into a space that needed a voice.
Well, that's just it. Like, look around the NFL draft space. Like, it's like a bar at last call in Boston, man. Like, it is packed wall to wall. And, you know, everybody's trying to get like 2 drinks for the price of 1 at the time. And like the olders, you know, the veterans in the group, the veterans are like, all right, it's time for us to hit the doorway. Like, we got to go home. We can't stay here. And yeah, I mean, the F1 space is, you know, it's me and the New York Times. I was literally an invite only interview media session with Gunther Steiner a couple of weeks ago. It was me, the New York Times, and a bunch of European outlets. And I'm like, all right, this is a brand new party for me. I mean, now I'm like, you know, the drunk Bostonian and those kinds of rooms,
something different that you're thriving in. No, it's not. It's but you always need that guy. That guy's always needed.
Yeah.
No,
that guy is always needed every way you go.
Yeah, just don't make me not like you by drafting my Mason Graham to the Patriots. Because if I lose a Michigan man who I absolutely love to the Pats, I'm going to be pretty pissed.
Yeah. I don't know if that's what they're going to do. I'm so fascinated by what they do.
Me too.
I mean, I think they go tackle just because, you know, you bring in Carlton Davis, you know, you put him against Christian Gonzalez. Like, that's probably, you know, your CB duo for the next 5 years, you're hoping.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I know a lot of Patriots fans are like, they can still draft Travis Hunter. I think if he's there, they might still draft him. And now you've got 3 corners and a guy that can play wide too. So I think it's either tackle or Travis Hunter if he falls to them at 4. I'd be very surprised, Doug, if they draft Mason Graham.
Yeah, I would too now, especially after signing Williams. After signing Williams and having Barrymore, you know what I mean?
Double it up.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the theme of the show tonight. Is we're talking about free agency and just this concept of what did you do, how'd you do it, and how did it set you up for the draft? And the reality is this is the first time the Patriots can firmly say I won the offseason.
Yeah, you've had a great offseason for sure.
Like we used to make fun of the Dolphins and it became a pejorative where you say, oh, you won the offseason because they're the Dolphins. We can all laugh at that.
Right. Yeah,
we all collectively can laugh at that. But the Patriots are not a team that have been known to go out and spend that way. I mean, I can think of one
unless
time.
They're tight ends.
Well, here's the thing. I can think of one time in my entire life where they did it. And it was the desperation 2021 offseason where they went out and said, hey, Belichickian. They went out and got Cam Newton and Hunter Henry, and we're going to bring in Matt Judon, and we're going to sign all of these guys, and we're going to quickly rebuild a winning Patriots organization because we had one down year after Tom Brady left, and we have to get this thing moving.
Yeah. And well, part of it, though, remember, they had the most money to spend.
Yes.
So, I mean, you got to do something.
It's got to go somewhere.
And I think what's fascinating, though, is, they spent a lot of money and, they improved. But we're still talking about the fact that sitting at 4, there's 5 positions theoretically they could draft.
Wow,
I mean, that's where they are right now because there's a lot of holes that you still have to fill, even with all these additions. We were talking about wide receivers probably in play. Defensive tackle with Williams probably not, but it's still theoretically a possibility. Offensive tackle is in play. There's a number of positions they could still address with the 4th overall pick, which, yes, they did a good job at free agency. Yes, they're better than they were when free agency began.
But that's not saying much. You don't own the 4th pick if you did a great job building a roster last year and fostering growth. I saw a tweet that made me laugh, and I want to talk to you about it. The quote was, it was literally a picture of all of the pre-UFA players. And then it was like a list of trade targets. And the guy just goes, hey, maybe the real wide receiver number 1 here was the friends we made along the way. All of it to say, we had all this money to spend. And the Patriots walked away with Mac Hollins. First of all, how dare you? Second of all,
you fucking prick.
I mean, look, if we can't get a big time wide receiver, we're at least going to make our friends a little weaker in the division.
And that's not a bad idea. And now, not
a bad idea.
And what you saw was Mac Hollins is a guy who will go to the wall for his team.
Absolutely.
Having not known the Buffalo Bills and showing up in his 1 year, he's pulling guys' hair. He's down there train wrecking people. He's committing OPI, but doing it with enough veteran savvy that he's not getting flagged. Every strong
commit OPI every play. I'm a firm believer in that.
Every strong
make him call it.
Every strong team needs that guy. And so you got the glue guy in the wide receiver room. You've achieved
exactly. We got that.
And you paid a premium for it, but you had, to your point, you had the money to spend. So now the question is, where do they go to make this offense better outside of the offensive line? At the skill positions, it doesn't seem like there's anything left there on the market to really leaps and bounds improve these skill groups, does it?
Well, apparently old friend Stephon Diggs was in town right now.
We were just talking about him, and
during
it sucks,
our live show,
and it sucks that like he didn't break his ankle or break his arm. It sucks that it's a torn ACL and he's going to be 32 in November. You know what I mean? That's the only bad thing about that. But I think, and again, I'm a Michigan man, so it sucks saying this, but he's good. I think Vrabel has enough smarts and the wherewithal to understand that your high-end assets in the draft more than likely are going towards helping your second-year quarterback. And that's where they should go.
Yeah.
Give him the help that he needs. If it's offensive line, fine. If it's McMillan at 4, if they're in love with him, If they love it, whatever, just get him weapons. You know what I mean? That's weapons and protection.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, this is that proverbial rookie quarterback contract window, right? Where you've identified at least the potential that he is your long-term answer at quarterback. And I think, he's played like you would expect a third overall pick to play. He played well last year. Are there things he needs to improve upon? Absolutely. But you've got the potential to have your franchise quarterback. Now do everything you can under the sun to help him. Whether it's a left tackle at 4, if they love McMillan at 4, then fantastic. If they like Bert, if they love a receiver that's there at 4, great. If Travis Hunter's staring you in the face and you're like, you know what? We've got 2 good corners. Let's make him a wide receiver because he can play wide receiver in the NFL. Then do it. But like whatever it is, help your young quarterback, which is again back to the point of a Graham. I don't think that's the play because how much does he really help Drake May?
Right.
It's all about helping Drake May. And yeah, getting off the field on 3rd and 2 might help. But getting a guy that's going to catch a pass on 3rd and 7 and turn it into a first down might help you a little bit more. Or getting a guy that's going to pick up a blitz on 3rd and 7 to give you a chance to make that throw to convert it is going to help Drake May more than a defensive tackle.
How did you feel when you watched this play out? Because I remember talking to a couple people in the Patriots sphere about this idea in the lead up to free agency, about the concept of, like, Mike Debate, even though I call him Mike Debate. I call him that because I said it once.
I do too. It's Debate.
I said it and he didn't correct me. And then afterwards he goes,
he's too nice of a guy.
Exactly. He goes, well, I just didn't think it was proper for me to correct you while you were recording your show. I go, that's where you're wrong. We're all jackasses. You can correct me all the time. And so with that, he and I had a conversation about the offensive line and how I look back at the Buffalo Bills. If everybody in the AFC East wants to try to make a template for how you should build your team, you go back to the Bills who tore down their offensive line and made it the most underpaid. They were the worst and the most underpaid offensive line in the entire NFL in 2018. They made $12 million that year, and Taylor Lewan made 19. Mm-hmm. Collectively, all 5 starters made $12 million. Then they went forward and paid for 9 new starting offensive linemen the following season. And they had Deion Dawkins. Mm-hmm. And they said, look, we're going to bring in swing tackles. We're going to bring in everybody off the street. Everybody who's going to see the field except for Deion Dawkins is new. And we're then going to backfill in the draft. And now we set a floor and we build from there. I'm surprised the Patriots didn't take a similar approach, a volume approach to the offensive line, given how bad it was last year. What's your opinion on that? And then, because you can't fix that in one singular draft, right?
No, you can't. And the fact that, look at the contract that Dan Moore got from Tennessee. That tells you how this league feels about this incoming tackle class. It's okay. You might have a couple guys Campbell is good. Mayweather was good. You've got some kids at the top that can play, but you're not going to wholesale fill I think 3 spots maybe that you need to fill. Swing tackle, left tackle. Onwenu they're still high on, but you got Moses as the right tackle right now, but you probably want to get 2-3 tackles in this draft and another interior offensive lineman. You're not filling that all out in this draft class. And so I was surprised that they didn't take more swings in free agency. It won't surprise me if now we're in phase 4, 5 of free agency. They just added Bradbury.
Yeah,
maybe you see some pickups like that where they're going to add a couple of depth guys here and there because going into this offseason, there were probably 3 spots on the started offensive line, let alone depth, that they needed to address. And they've got 2 with Bradbury and Moses at center and right tackle. But I don't think everybody's looking at those guys as long-term answers. They're stopgaps for the next 2 seasons while you still figure out your entire offensive line room for this year and beyond.
To me, I looked at your free agency and I said, for all the money you guys had, Milton Williams is a great defensive lineman, depending on how you scheme him and what you do with him. There we go. Hang on. I want to get that. Chris, make sure when we put this on video that you get that reaction.
Good for him. He had a fantastic second half of the season into a playoff run. Like, you want to talk about getting hot at the right time to capitalize and get a payday? Like, good for him. Like, he had a couple pressures a game. Then mid-season, he suddenly has 9 pressures in one game down the stretch into the playoffs, playing fantastic. Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic that he got the big payday. It's fantastic he was able to put up those pressures. Is he going to do that, though, when he's not playing next to Jalen Carter and, Jordan Davis? Like, is he going to be able to replicate what he was able to do in Philadelphia along that defensive line? Now, maybe put him next to Barmore. You got Landry on the edge. Like, maybe they can do some stuff with him up front where he's going to replicate those kinds of numbers, but it's a big bet. And I think the other thing we saw, and I think most perhaps instructive thing about where the Patriots are right now as an organization, is seeing Chris Godwin go back to Tampa Bay and turn down an extra $20 million that he was offered from the Patriots. Mm-hmm. That tells you everything about where the Patriots are right now. If this was 10 years ago, that deal, that's not happening.
It wouldn't have been a question. Right.
And they won't need to, because he's going to New England to play for Tom and under Bill. Right. Like, that's the difference where they are right now. Now, they've got a window where they can say, win some games, show improvement. And then it's like, okay, maybe you do want to come play for Drake May. Maybe you do want to come for Mike Vrabel. But right now, the going price on that seems to be more than $20 million.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's strange to me. Because in an off season and so we've been talking about wins and failures and how you're set up for the draft. I feel like in a year where you had so much money and there was a massive opportunity to do what the Bills did and just wholesale change your offensive line at least. Because if you're going to try to support the quarterback, like the Bills decided, hey, Josh Allen was our guy after game 1. Yeah. Not even game 1, game 0.5. The Bills go, fuck Nathan Peterman, he's out. Yep. Josh Allen, we know it's not supposed to be your time, but you're in. And this team is terrible, and we're sorry, but you're going to have to go out there and play.
And they almost get shut out in Green Bay.
And he slogged it out, but then down the stretch started to win.
Yep.
And then just like Drake May kind of found a little bit of footing here and there. Like you saw, even that Bills game in December. Even in that Bills game in December, you saw them throwing punches. You saw them making plays right up until things kind of blew up on them. And then you walk away from that going, if this is a kid who just gets a little more support, maybe we can build around this. And then you watch them do everything but free agency. And you go, you had all this money. Your line didn't get overwhelmingly better. Your skill positions aren't overwhelmingly better. Your tight end position is still weak by comparison to everything else in the NFL. If you look at top teams, the Ravens, the Chiefs, the Bills. So I guess this is a thing where you spent a lot of money, but you're still dependent on this draft. How many starters do you think you have to come out of this draft with, and how much pressure is that on a franchise?
Probably 3 starters. That's a lot. I mean, and it's a lot, and it's a lot to ask for when you're pretty much betting the draft on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, you look at the additions overwhelmingly on the defensive side of the ball. Now, that probably shouldn't be a surprise given Mike Vrabel, head coach, like defensive background. Like, he's probably looking at this like best in his mind. He's like, best way to support a young quarterback, have a good defense. Run the football.
And that's why I brought the Graham question up to you. Is he going to have the sickest rotation? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, if it's his mindset, you know what I mean? Going, you know what? I'm just going to.
That's his thinking.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know.
He's like, you know how we're going to replicate Milton Williams' pressure numbers from Philly? Have Mason Graham along the defensive line too. Like, maybe that's the thought. Like, you know what? Best way to protect our young quarterback is to have a defense that's going to give up just 10 points a game.
Yep.
And then all I need from you is 14, Drake. Maybe.
Yeah.
And in this era of the NFL, as we're seeing, and guys, we've talked about this for a couple of years now. We're seeing running the football. We're seeing defense. We're seeing offensive line play, defensive line play, trench play start to come back into vogue. Obviously, the Eagles, with what they did with Saquon and that offensive line, teams are going to be like, what can we do? How can we replicate that? That's why you see Ashton Jeanty go top 8 probably in this draft. People are going to be like, how do we get that run game? Let's draft the running back.
That would shock you if you took him at 4, though, right? That would shock you if you took him at 4.
I don't think they're going to take him at 4, but I do think there's going to be a team. Like, if you're the Raiders and you're sitting there at 6 and you don't have to force a quarterback now with Geno Smith in tow, him and Geno Smith, that offense.
Yeah.
Pete Carroll's got his new Marshawn.
Yeah.
That wouldn't surprise me.
I love this. I love talking to you. I love picking your brain about everything Patriots. And it's interesting because I think we can all agree that even though the Patriots didn't have the greatest free agency haul, when you look at it in totality and you look at where every franchise is, I wouldn't be shocked if the Patriots leapfrog the Jets and maybe even the Dolphins in terms of how you're chasing the Bills for the division.
And I don't know if they're chasing the Bills for the division. I mean, I still think that I'm looking at this like, look, if they can get to 7-8 wins, I'll be happy.
And the Jets may come in lower than that.
Oh, yeah.
The Jets probably, whatever that is, I'm taking the under. And the Dolphins, they've got some questions too. I mean, look, Mike McDaniel has decided, look, offensive guards apparently don't matter. Offensive line doesn't matter that much. I mean, okay. I mean, with that quarterback, okay, sure. So, yeah, I think that there are some questions in New York and Miami that need to be answered, and I think the Patriots have taken a step forward. I still think that even if they take 2 big steps forward, they're still going to be 2 big steps behind Buffalo when all is said and done.
So with that, I love talking to you about this. I want to know where everyone can find your content and what you're focused on for the offseason.
I mean, you can find me at SBNation.com. I'm Mark Schofield on Twitter, Mark Schofield 3916 or whatever on Threads. There are too many social media apps. Like, can we all just go like back to one spot? This is crazy. I'm on Blue Sky.
Where do you
my
hang
snap
out?
face?
Where do you hang
What's
out?
that?
Where do you hang out? Because I don't see you tweeting anymore.
I really stopped doing anything. Like, I'm on Blue Sky. I don't even know what my name is. I think it's like Mark Schofield or whatever it is. I've stopped tweeting because basically, like,
because we're too old for this shit.
I've seen, like,
because we're all Murtaugh. We're all Murtaugh. I'm too old for this
way
shit.
too old for this. Like, nobody like clicks on links anymore. So what's the point? Like, trying to share a link and like nobody tweets, nobody reads it. So what's the point? So SBNation.com, just back like we did in the olden days, like set it up as your homepage or whatever and go there. Like, yeah. I mean, off season for me, there's no off season because, you know, we're sitting here, we're yapping it up on a Wednesday night. I get the Chinese Grand Prix in a couple of days. They're going to be up at 3 a.m. watching cars go around.
I love it. I love it.
2 hours in the morning. Like,
yes, sir.
I love it.
There's no off season there. We go from Super Bowl into F1 preseason testing, into combine free agency, into the F1 season. We have the draft at the end of April, and 3 days later, I'm flying to Miami. Like, it's a crazy, crazy life.
Staley, Schofield, and Arteaga. Staley new to the roundup here, so good conversation with him on the Jets. But I mean, I'm sure there's something Buffalo to talk.
Of course, there always is. There's always a Bills tie-in because otherwise people wouldn't just listen to me talk about. Like, I mean, I guess they would because people do show up for the Joe Rogan show, and Joe Rogan basically just sits down and goes, "Hey, let me bring in a smart person," and then go, "Hey, monkey, tell me what you know." Hey, you're Neil deGrasse Tyson. Tell me why UFOs won't work.
Right.
And it's just like you get to talk to other people. That's why I love this roundup. It really was born of how we approached the draft shows, which, if you're listening to this now, know that we're kicking off our draft coverage here over the next handful of weeks as we get closer and closer to this.
5 weeks away.
It really is it doesn't feel like it should be that close.
Can't wait.
Doug, we should actually spend 15 minutes talking about fucking Drew's duster.
I'm more concerned about that over the Alexander Keiths that he's drinking.
Dude, it's the greatest beer. It's so good Canada won't ship it south of the border. They keep it a secret. You got to go to the duty free.
Every time we go fishing for a week in Canada, that's what we buy. That's all they drink. And I get to drink it once a year, and I don't even drink beer. I'm a gin guy. Thank you, Chris, by the way. These are fantastic. We got them at fridge at home. The long drinks.
The long drink is probably the best canned cocktail out there.
It's so good.
Keith's,
so good.
Sleeman's, Molson Dry, Molson Export. There's all kinds of cool stuff up north that we don't get down here. Good job picking a fight with everybody over this stuff. You're making my life harder.
I think my uncle's devastated now that 40 Creek's about to go through the roof. That's his favorite drink. He drinks 40 Creek.
I love how everyone's like, businesses are being crippled. And I go, you sons of bitches, my Alexander case just cost me more.
And now they're going to give you a hassle at the border when you go over to duty free to buy it.
I'll see them in hell. Me and you know what? Honestly, the duty free and I have a complicated relationship. I used to challenge them all the time because most people, when you're going to the duty free, you do the thing where you go, oh man, I want to stay as close to like, I got to keep it simple, keep it light. That way they don't feel like they want to pull me out of the car and make me pay this duty. I go the opposite way. I go, do you know how much paperwork these guys had to fill out for every single bottle that's in this car?
Yep.
In fact, there's a couple of people listening to this podcast that I know can speak to this. It's like, do you know what a process it's going to be to actually inventory and tally this if I just juice this thing? And I don't even try to hide it. I used to line up the back seat of my Nissan Altima and I'd pull up and you'd watch the border agent's face go, ah. And he goes, what? Well, okay, where are you coming from? I go, oh, I went up to Ming Tay. I went up to Ming Tay in Fort Erie, got the puffy clouds, got an appetizer, got the steamed edamame, and I hit the, he goes, well, you're not supposed to hit the duty free if you haven't been there for 24 hours. I go, yeah, well, I did. And what you get into a conversation with is they will hassle you, but everybody knows they don't want to have to tabulate that.
For you people who are listening who don't know what Ming Tay is, it's a restaurant. He did not go to a rub and tug, even though it is legal in the province of Ontario. He went to go eat, and then he went to go buy booze.
It's authentic Chinese cuisine, not this Americanized BS that we get here. But with that said, you go there and you challenge them on just how badly do you want this? How badly do you want to have to? And they're like, man, why are you doing this to me? And as long as everything else runs clean, I've been let go so many times.
And it's funny, I can think of all the times, and even with you, the experience at the borders that we've had doing stuff. And as soon as you said the Nissan Altima, all I thought about was you hitting that lady on the thruway really lightly from behind and me driving by you and you were sitting on the front of your car smoking a cigarette in a light rain. And I didn't even stop to see how my roommate and friend was. No. I just creeped by you.
He goes, look, he's out. He's out and he's got a lit cigarette. Obviously, he's fine. So we got to talk about the Buffalo Bills here. And I guess the idea of this all is that we bring people in here to talk to us about how they did. And we got to talk about the Buffalo Bills. And it's funny because I had something put together and I had to scrap it because I'm driving to here to do this. And I hear on WGR they're having an interesting conversation. They're saying, look, it's great that we put these resources into our defensive line. You go out and you get a Bosa, you get an Ogunjobi that you think can be better than Austin Johnson and give you a little more pass rush juice. And then you look at Hesh and Hoyt. I love that we've been calling him Jochen Hesh all weekend because he's picking 55.
Hochet, something.
He picked 55. You're like, that's Jochen Hesh's number. You son of a bitch.
Yo-Yo was mad.
I would be too.
Yeah.
So you take a look at that, but then you look at the offensive side of the ball and you go, you added a Joshua Palmer, and that's not a terrible move.
No.
But now the question is, did you do enough? Like, what changes? What makes your team materially different? And it's probably one of the most salient things I've heard from that show in a long time. Obviously, it was Bulldog, not Mike Shope. Bulldog, kind of this, not long-winded, but really long but interesting explanation of this premise. That when you look at who was important in the past, and, we had guys. We did the thing of having 2-star wide receivers. Mm-hmm. And maybe not star, but we had Diggs. And we had Davis, and that was a really good 1-2 combination. And then something weird would happen. Like, Chris, if you want to pull up the postseason playoff statistics there for Gabe Davis and for Stephon Diggs. The problem always kind of became, because everyone's like, well, what did we do? And his whole premise was who steps up at playmaker to put themselves in the conversation of difference maker, right? The thing that you hope Bosa can be for us on defense. Who is the equivalent of that on offense? Because you didn't go out and obtain it. So then you're hoping someone grows into the role?
No,
now, I'm not going to cop his bit. I want you to go listen to it over at WGR. Look for it. It was on the Wednesday 3/19/2025 drive time show. It was a really interesting conversation.
I think Bean re-signed it in Shakir. That playoff performer has been Shakir. Shakir has been outstanding in the playoffs.
Sure.
Shakir hasn't had his drops. Shakir has been better in his career in our playoffs than Diggs was.
But is he the guy? Because if you look at the way this went, like, Chris, who do you have up here? Gabe Davis? Gabe Davis in the regular season, he never topped 1,000 yards for the Buffalo Bills. At the same time, he had some of the most prolific playoff games. I mean, 4 for 4 for 85 yards against Indy that week.
And do you remember those? I still remember that was playing Phillip Rivers. That was here, and those toe touches on the sideline on 3rd and 18, on 3rd and 9, where Josh throwing it where only he can. Like, those catches were huge.
The loss to Kansas City, the 13 seconds game. All time.
Nuts.
One of the greatest playoff performances by a wide receiver of all time was wasted in that moment. 4 touchdowns, 201 yards on 8 catches. That's insanity.
Yeah.
You look at the game that he had against Miami. You were there sitting next to me for that game. Skylar Thompson. They win that game by a field goal. He has 113 yards on 6 catches and a touchdown. Like, prolific. But during the regular season, you can't count on it.
No, the only regular season boom I could think of with him is that Pittsburgh game.
Okay.
Remember the Pittsburgh game when he had the 2 touchdowns? Passes. He ripped that away from, wasn't it Fitzpatrick? Fitzpatrick?
No, I think it wasn't Minka Fitzpatrick. I think it was our guy, our former cornerback who went
Levi Wallace.
Levi Wallace?
Yeah, he just had, like, that game I can remember. But I think the problem, like, at least in my mind, like when I'm watching them get into the playoffs and everything, I think they did the right thing so far with the offense. That's not the issue. The issue is that defense.
Well, sure, but look at the other side of the coin, though. You had a Stephon Diggs who was electric for you in the regular season.
And then disappeared.
And then Chris, if you want to pull up his stats, the playoff stats as a Buffalo Bill for Stephon Diggs were just not good. No. I mean, you're talking about what? So first game against Indy, great. That year, he was prolific, right?
All pro,
128 and a tutty.
He was all pro that year.
106 and a tutty against Baltimore in that Indy game. 128 and a tutty, 106 and a touchdown the following week against Baltimore in a close game.
Taron Johnson pick game.
And then, Chris, where did he go after that? Like, you go down here and you start looking at where...
114 yards against Miami. No touchdowns, though.
And then how many other games did he have where he had 70 or more? 0.
Nothing.
And then how many games do you see where he's getting 9 targets, 10 targets, and he's not creating the same volume of production?
And it sucks because you're right. You're right about all that. And he had some big games for us and everything like that. And all I could think of are those 2 drops versus Kansas City at home where we win that game if he catches one of those.
And so what I do is I think about this conversation of, did we do enough? Again, go back and listen to WGR today because I think it was a rare, really salient conversation. And then as it pertains to this, the question is, did we do enough? And people will tell you no. People will say, oh, you didn't do enough. But did we do enough to leave our draft board open and at least set the floor for the draft? Because I'll tell you what, who would you rather be right now, the Buffalo Bills or the Cincinnati Bengals? If we're just talking about offense in a vacuum, let's compare the two situations. The Bengals just went out and spent the most money ever at one point in time in NFL history, the highest percentage of the salary cap to 2 players on offense at the same time who are not a quarterback. And you look around the rest of their roster. Yes, you have a great quarterback who won Comeback Player of the Year, and some people argue that he should be an MVP candidate. He's captain if he was healthy and if this didn't happen and whatever. Okay, we don't live in that world. You have a team that has dynamic playmakers in the passing game. But you've also set yourself up, if that's this conversation, is how did you use this to set yourself up for the draft? Cincinnati now has to go into the draft having released a starting offensive lineman who was bad anyway in Alex Kappa.
Mm-hmm. They re-signed Ford.
You re-signed Ford, but what's that?
Nothing.
He shouldn't be a starter on your team.
And he had a crap ton of minutes.
He played a lot. What is this, a hockey game?
Yeah, like he did. He had a crap ton of minutes for them.
He played a lot for that team. And Chris, if you want to do me a favor, pull up the Bengals Our Lads, because I just want to point this out. Not only on offense, but also on defense. You're talking about maybe letting Trey Hendrickson walk if you can't make the contract work. Who else do you have? You went from having a terrible defense. you've done nothing to materially upgrade that defense. And so now you're going to roll in with what is about the same in a team that had to score 30 to win.
And you got worse on defense.
And you got worse in the trenches on offense. So if we're just talking about this, what you are now, if you're the Bengals, is you took your entire free agency and soaked it into 2 players. Now you retained them, they're stars. And everyone on the Bills would say, I would kill to have a Jamar Chase or a T. Higgins.
And I want you to think of this, though. So this is the position that they're in. I think they're worse off, and we just watched an amazing last 4 games by them. They went off. Like, it was fun to watch. But that defense was so bad. That defense kept them out. No turnovers. Yeah, they had the NFL leader in sacks. But no turnovers, no nothing like that, no stability on defense. And
yards after the catch allowed was an enormous statistic for the Bengals defense last year. So this is my point. It sets them up for the draft, where they now live in a place where just in order to get back to last year's level of execution as a football team, where, hey, I want to be able to win games, but I'm probably going to score 24 or more in order to be in that conversation. I have to get to 21 to 24 because my defense isn't going to be able to close games out. Even against some of the NFL's middling to slightly above average offenses. They have to go into this draft and come out of it with at least 3 to 4 starters.
And
they know this.
And it has to be, with the exception of one offensive lineman, it has to be on defense. They didn't replace anybody. They lost 2 defensive starters, and they re-signed their D tackle.
Yep.
They re-signed their D tackle. They haven't re-signed Trey yet. But here's the thing. They are in, and I think, just my personal opinion, I think you need to be balanced.
Sure.
I think you have Burrow, you have Chase. I think they need to spend that money on defense elsewhere. But this offseason, who? Were you going to get the D tackle from Philly who went to New England? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, does that really make you better? No, I want T. Higgins there. But they're in uncharted water, because tell me an NFL team ever, or in recent history, tell me an NFL team that has drafted 2 top 10 NFL wide receivers.
No, it's they had to do it. But my point is, now they have to go into the draft and they have this enormous pressure just to be a highly competitive football team.
They had to do it, and they're in a worse spot than Buffalo.
So the Buffalo Bills get to go into the draft saying, hey, okay, we didn't get the explosive star playmaker that you all think would unlock, or that we, and when I say you all think, it's not like I'm talking down to fans who agree with this mindset. We believe that there needs to be like a game winner talent besides Josh Allen. When you say, hey, who's going to make a play in a clutch moment in a game for you?
It's Josh Allen.
Chris, go back to some of the clutch moments where we needed somebody last year. 4th and 2 against Kansas City. Who was the guy who made the play that won the game? It was Josh Allen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What other games, when you go, oh man, this game's so tight, I just need one person to break something and make it happen? The straw that stirs the drink is always Josh. You need to have somebody else do it, but I guess the reason, if I want to tie this back into my Gabe Davis, Stephon Diggs point, they couldn't have been more opposite players in the regular season compared to their postseason exploits.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, Gabe Davis is the thing of like, he was Josh Palmer all year long. But then in the playoffs, he was able to get it done. He was able to find a higher gear. And you would almost rather rely on, hey, at least I know where my floor is. I know my floor with this offense is I can make the divisional or championship round because I have an MVP caliber.
And you just said it perfectly. You just said, now think of the next step. The offense is not the problem here. No. If you go back through those 4 losses versus Kansas City, if you go back through them, not one time in the fourth quarter did we have a turnover. Did we have a takeaway? Did we have a big stop?
Nope.
Not one time. We need one turnover, one stop. We win those games. We got them in the regular season versus them, but that don't count. That's why I think it's more important to try and get that game changer on the defensive end.
And this free agency class, whether you like it or not, kind of set the Bills up to do that.
They did. Because if you're talking just on that alone, okay, what did you do? You brought back pretty much 4 are the same safeties that you had, except the guy from Washington who they added. And the D-line is upgraded, in my opinion, a little bit because I think Bosa is better than Miller. And right now, your glaring need, and you re-signed a bunch of guys. Right now, your glaring need is corner. You need another corner.
But when you talk about needs and things you have to walk away from this draft with a starter at,
we only have one. Cincinnati needs 5.
And in terms of the division, I can live with that. In terms of winning the AFC East and getting your scratch-off ticket to hosting a home playoff game and figuring it out from there, I can live with that.
Oh, yeah. Miami can't beat us. The Jets can't beat us. And New England's got to put it together.
Yep. So it'll be interesting to see how the rest of it plays out. I love getting together like this with a group of guests as knowledgeable and just, it's fun to talk to, is tonight's crowd. But for tonight, we got to get the hell out of here.
Let's do it.
I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Kruger. That's Doug Roloski. And this has been your AFC's Roundup.